A rainbow nation built by many. Who really freed South Africa? The struggle against apartheid in South Africa was a global effort, with various countries and international organizations playing significant roles in supporting the movement towards freedom and democracy. You know, the whole rainbow nation thing. But history, much like load shedding, can be a bit unreliable. So today we're flipping the script and asking who really deserves credit. Was it just those who sent money and strongly worded letters? Or were there silent heroes pulling strings from the shadows like a puppet master at a braai? Let's hear what some historians say.
Nigeria, the OG freedom fighters. Now you can't talk about fighting apartheid without mentioning Nigeria. They were the Beyoncé of the movement, fierce, iconic, and always there to drop a truth bomb on the South African regime. We're talking serious financial support for the ANC and other liberation movements. They basically said, you want to oppress our brothers and sisters? Fine, but you're not getting any of our oil money. And they didn't stop there. Nigeria imposed a full-on boycott of South African goods. It's like they say, when you hit them in the wallet, that's when they really start to feel the pinch. Zambia, home away from home. Imagine being kicked out of your own house just for wanting basic human rights. That was the reality for many South Africans during apartheid. But thankfully, Zambia stepped up and said, our doors are open, fam. From 1963 to 1994, Zambia became the headquarters in exile for the ANC. They provided a safe haven for freedom fighters and a base for external operations. Think of it as the coolest, most revolutionary Airbnb ever. It was a place where strategies were hatched, alliances were forged, and the spirit of resistance burned brighter than a Boer Wars on a braai. Tanzania, training ground for revolution. Now, you can't have a revolution without some serious training, right? That's where Tanzania comes in. They were like the boot camp instructors of the anti-apartheid movement, whipping freedom fighters into shape. Tanzania provided training camps and logistical support for various liberation movements across southern Africa, including the ANC. They knew that knowledge is power, and they armed these freedom fighters with the skills and knowledge they needed to fight for their rights. Talk about Pan-African solidarity. Chapter 4. Mozambique. The Underground Railroad of the South. Imagine risking your life just to cross a border to escape the clutches of an oppressive regime. That was the reality for many South Africans fleeing apartheid. And Mozambique, despite facing their own struggles, became a crucial passageway to freedom. They provided safe passage and support for the ANC and other liberation movements, even when it meant facing the wrath of the South African government. They were like the Underground Railroad of the South, whispering messages of hope and guiding people to safety. Chapter 5. Botswana, the quiet giant of resistance. Don't let their quiet demeanor fool you. Botswana was a silent force to be reckoned with during the fight against apartheid. They stood up to the South African government, providing refuge for exiled South Africans and a base for ANC activities. And they did it all while facing intense economic and military pressure. It's like they say, sometimes the quietest voices speak the loudest truths. Botswana, you a real one.
Chapter 6. Sweden, the Scandinavian superheroes. Now, let's head over to the Nordics, where Sweden was busy being the superhero of the anti-apartheid movement. They were one of the most vocal critics of apartheid on the international stage, using their platform to call out injustice and demand change. But they didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk, providing substantial financial support to the ANC and other liberation movements. Sweden, you were a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed content to look the other way. Norway, the land of majestic fjords. And, Vikings? Well, it turns out they were also fierce warriors for justice during the fight against apartheid. They opened their arms and their wallets, providing refuge for exiled leaders, and pouring financial aid into the movement. They even supported the cultural and educational development of South Africans in exile, because they understood that true liberation goes beyond just politics. It's about empowering people's minds and spirits. The United Kingdom, the motherland with a rather complicated relationship with South Africa. While the UK government dragged its feet on imposing sanctions, the people of Britain were having none of it. Anti-apartheid groups, trade unions and everyday citizens took to the streets, demanding an end to the injustice. It was a classic case of the people leading the way while the government played catch-up. Don't let their size fool you. The Netherlands was a powerhouse of activism during the anti-apartheid struggle. The Dutch anti-apartheid movement was like that friend who always shows up no matter what. They organized protests, raised funds, and campaigned tirelessly for sanctions against the South African regime. They were a constant thorn in the side of apartheid, and their unwavering support helped turn the tide towards freedom. Canada, known for its maple syrup politeness, and apparently its strong stance against apartheid. They joined the chorus of nations imposing sanctions on South Africa and provided crucial assistance to anti-apartheid groups and refugees fleeing the regime. They were like that reliable neighbor who always has your back, even when things get tough.
Now this one might surprise you. The Soviet Union, yes, that Soviet Union, played a significant role in supporting the armed struggle against apartheid. They saw it as part of a larger fight against imperialism and colonialism, and they weren't afraid to put their money where their mouth was. They provided military training, financial support, and yes, even weapons to the liberation movements. It's a reminder that the fight for freedom often makes for strange bedfellows. Cuba, the island nation known for its cigars, classic cars, and oh yeah, that whole revolution thing. But their involvement in the fight against apartheid went beyond just ideological solidarity. Cuban troops played a decisive role in the Angolan Civil War, particularly in the Battle of Quito Cuanavale, which is considered a turning point in the struggle against South African-backed forces. It was a reminder that sometimes you gotta fight fire with fire. Chapter 13. China, the sleeping giant of Asia, also dipped its toes into the anti-apartheid waters. While their support was more low-key compared to others, they did provide some military training and material support to the PAC and later the ANC. It might not have been the most enthusiastic embrace, but hey, every little bit helps, right?
Chapter 14. The United Nations, that big, sometimes chaotic, but ultimately well-intentioned organization, also played a crucial role in the fight against apartheid. They passed numerous resolutions condemning the South African regime and called for international sanctions. They were like the world's conscience, constantly reminding everyone that what was happening in South Africa was wrong and that the world wouldn't stand for it. Chapter 15. Imagine being kicked out of a club, not for being too cool, but for being a terrible human being. That's what happened to South Africa when the Commonwealth of Nations, that group of former British colonies, decided they'd had enough. They booted South Africa out in 1961 and continued to apply pressure through declarations and sanctions. It was a clear message that the world was watching and that apartheid had no place in a civilized society.
The global efforts of these countries, organizations, and movements created sustained pressure on the apartheid regime, contributed to its eventual collapse, and supported South Africa's transition to a democratic society in 1994. But let's not forget, the fight for true equality doesn't end with the fall of a regime. It's an ongoing process, one that requires constant vigilance, dialogue, and a commitment to building a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. We owe it to the sacrifices of those who came before us to never take our freedom for granted and to continue fighting for a more just and equitable world. Pre-colonialism Africa was just a country of average people with kindness and love, no knowledge of white or Indian people, no feminism and poverty. Just kidding. But seriously, let's not forget that Africa has a rich and complex history that extends far beyond colonialism and apartheid. It's a continent brimming with diversity, innovation, and resilience. So let's celebrate the victories while acknowledging the work that still needs to be done. Stay tuned for more surprising historical insights, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.